Okay, here we go. This is the updated version of the timeline analysis of my life by Gabriel Tomás Mondragon. Date is November 11th, 2023. Time is 2:13 p.m. And I advise everyone to do this. Excuse the farts. I'm a poor person, so I eat poor people food. Tina's burritos at Walmart, 58 cents a piece. And there's a whole story behind that. Like, the reason I'm really poor this month is I give a lot of money to Israel. So, totally worth it. Awesome. I'm not complaining. Anyway. So, this is something I first did after reading Dr. Albert Ellis's Fear and Emotion and Behavior Therapy. And I combined that with other psychological stuff that I've read. I didn't get a YouTube education. I actually got the books and read the books. It's a very big difference. There's so much garbage on YouTube and just the internet in general. And lies. A ton of lies. Anyway. What you do is you do a timeline analysis and overlay a factor analysis. A factor analysis is where you isolate and identify contributing factors to maladaptive thoughts and behaviors. And so this creates a cause and effect, relationship between events in your life. This caused this, right? Like the butterfly effect. You can go as far back as you want. And this now enhanced version, the updated version, has much more. So I was born in 1982. And the current year is... I guess there's nothing really to do with that. There you go. 2023. Coming up on 2024. November 2023. Now, a lot was going on in 1982, but let's just look at what I've collected for the events that led up to my birth. Okay, so first we'll start way back here in 1608. The Mondragon family has been in Taos, New Mexico since 1608. Spanish Catholicism is a theft and mutilation of Judaism, so they followed the law of Moses on no intermarriage, which meant no race mixing with the heathen, which to them was Native Americans. So there was a lot of inbreeding. One of the first conquistador colonies, 58 original people on the boat, only 12 were female. So I guarantee the Spaniards didn't follow age of consent laws, incest, etc. And they bred their way up to a few thousand, within a few generations. It's word of mouth, oral history. Around Espanola is where I heard that. Anyhow, so a lot of inbreeding. But the Native Americans, of course, pre-1968, I've done an ancestry DNA test. I 60% Spanish, largely Basque, as well as other things, and 30% Native American. Just, my dad's a big liar, but me and my dad have darker eyes, skin, and hair than my grandmother and grandfather and Aunt Geraldine and Uncle Anthony. So I think my grandma Tomasita had an extramarital affair with a Native American, and that's why me and my dad have different eyes, skin, and hair. The Native American pancreas and liver doesn't secrete enzymes necessary to process and metabolize alcohol into sugar. This is why Native Americans have the highest alcohol overdose death rate per ethnicity, just like the Aborigines. They thousands and thousands of years of intergenerational incest from being isolated on the Americas had led to a decline in the quality of genetics, essentially, organs and things like that. Now, this isn't just to be a broad, vague generalization. This means all race mixing is good. There's pros and cons to both, in my opinion, and I can get into that later. But this led to the events. This is all relevant. And then, after listening to a non-mainstream education on the internet, in the 1930s, Jewish Hollywood, it was, Eastern Hungarian immigrants, started putting sexual content in Hollywood, and the Catholic Church organized a boycott. It worked, and this is where you get the rating system from. The rating system, of course, was the League of Morality formed by Catholics, which stopped sexual content in Hollywood for 30 years in Hollywood movies, up until the 1960s. In the 1960s, you had the Civil Rights Movement, which included the drug and sex revolution. A lot of women's liberation as well, of course, feminism. And this was a big increase in marijuana use. Now, between the 1930s and the 1960s, of course, you had World War II. And after World War II, the 1950s was peak United States, when the United States was 90% white and Christian, and arguably the most powerful it's ever been, and likely ever will be. So the 1960s is when my mother and father were born, 1956, 1954. And so that was their childhood, that was their formative years. And of course, this is where you had Cheech and Chong and a lot of other. And that's an interesting thing in itself, because marijuana was illegal then, but somehow it was freedom of speech to push marijuana in media, which continued all the way into the 2000s and beyond. So how does that work? Pretty corrupt, right? America's been pretty corrupt before I was born. But this influenced my parents. So I have a side theory here that both mom and dad were influenced by feminism. And so they either subconsciously or consciously destroyed my life because I was a male, and they felt like, oh, men have had being so good for so long, which isn't true. Like my grandfather, for example, both grandfathers worked really hard their whole lives, and their lives were rough, and they made sure their kids had a roof over the head and stuff like that. They didn't have privilege. There was no patriarchy then. Life was rough. Anyway. So this is the intervention from the Spanish Catholic morality to, traditionalism to modernity, essentially. The moral decline began in the 1960s. Everything we're experiencing now is the downstream consequences of the drug and sex revolution. The old boomers. My dad married my mom after 4 months. My theory is that he got her pregnant before marrying her, and then married her because they were still trying to hold some semblance of Catholicism, of their traditions and their morality, but that had already been destroyed through the owners of media pushing the drug and sex revolution. So at this point, this is a critical point in the turn of American history. Had the Spanish Catholics been true Catholics, they would have driven out the pornography sellers, the marijuana dealers, the Peter Fondas, the Dennis Hoppers, right? The acid dealers, the mushroom pushers, people like that. They would have driven them out of the land. Instead, they were their best customers. So genetics dominated culturally transmitted traits. I'm so sorry about the farts. Yeah, if only life was better, huh? So, 1982 was born. Have a family history of schizophrenia. Grandma Gloria was in the mental hospital twice, once in 1969, once again in 1974. Both times declared paranoid schizophrenic. The first time was emergency order, the second time was voluntary. So we have a family history of schizophrenia from the inbreeding in not only the Spanish conquistador colonies, but also from the Native Americans as well. Along with a hereditary predisposition to diabetes. There's a whole bunch of stuff. You can Google genetic, hereditary conditions, conquistador families in northern New Mexico. We get a lot of literature on it. A lot of medical journals. I digress. 1982 born. Earliest memory I had was in 2nd grade. 1990, 1989. So 1989, parents were already divorced. My brother's dad. My mom had a child out of wedlock before marrying my dad. Catholics. And Larry was his name, my older brother. He's still alive as far as I know. Haven't talked to him in years. He was a big gang member. Even as a kid, as a 12-year-old, he was already arrested. But this is before he was 12. His dad showed up, Peter Tapia. Peter Tapia was a Marine, alcoholic, never worked a day in his life aside from being a Marine or a drunk wife beater. He was abusing us. My dad had custody on the weekends, and he would come pick me up, and I would have bruises and scars. My mom had dented a metal pan on my head for something I did in her dream. I didn't realize then what I know now. This is all symptoms of schizophrenia. My mom has schizophrenia from her mom, which that's luckily my brother has it as well. But my brother smokes marijuana and keeps a job. A big part of that is Albuquerque has very low standards for employment because of its high rates of drug use. But also, I think my dad's genetics versus my brother's genetics, the Marine genetics were just more physically stronger. My dad's genetics were more high IQ, but I think the Marine genetics actually made my brother more resilient to, the adverse effects of drugs and things like that. Just a theory. I digress. And my brother isn't fine on marijuana. That guy has a ton of problems that he wouldn't have if he would just quit smoking weed. My dad showed up to pick me up. Knew I was getting beat. I'll never forget this. And Peter Tapia stared my dad down with eye contact. He punked my dad like a little B-word. And my dad, like a dog, right, looked at the ground, submitted, nice to meet you, and meekly shook his hand, even though this guy's like, yeah, I'm beating your son, And then my dad took me for the weekend, and that was the moment that I knew that my dad would never be there for me, to save me, to protect me from, getting beat by my brother, my mom, my brother's dad, etc. Fast forward to 5th grade. 5th grade was 1992. My mom saw that I was smart, but not doing well in school because of my brother Larry. So she promised me a Wolverine toy with the retractable claws, right? We had the television. Saturday morning cartoons included the X-Men. I loved the X-Men back then. And so I got straight A's, no problem. And the school took notice of that, and they tested me, and I tested as gifted. Was eligible for grants in a private school, which means my IQ was roughly 135 to 140. And my mom and my dad had a meeting after that, where my dad had a chance to take custody. Because my dad got his degree in philosophy in the 1970s and 1980s, he had a degree with no guarantee of income. He couldn't afford to feed and house himself, let alone me. So in 1992, he rejected custody. Despite always blaming my mother, oh, it's your mom's fault, she's such a B-word for, taking custody, I wish I could have custody. Oh yeah, the opportunity to take custody, he rejected it. Okay. Back then, I believed my dad's lies because a son wants to believe his father is the best, right? Anyway, so because my dad rejected custody, they both knew that if they didn't get me out of the house and away from my older brother, the gang member, Larry, that I'd have no chance in the future. So both parents just destroyed my future, just threw my one chance to rise out of poverty into a higher income, threw it away like it was nothing. My life meant nothing to my parents from the beginning. Clearly. Their words will say whatever they want. Their actions are very much louder than their words, and the results of their actions. So, that summer, my brother got out of kiddie prison. He was already incarcerated at 12 years old. I remember the police showing up arresting him. He was breaking and entering, which is footprints of the crime scene. He was digging the mud out of his boots when the cops showed up. That summer he pushed marijuana on me, which activates and exacerbates the schizophrenia the mom lied about, which came from the inbreeding of the Spanish conquistador colonies, as well as the Native Americans. But likely the Spanish colonies, because the Lovato family in the South Valley has pretty bad rates of schizophrenia. Very heavily inbred is my guess. Pretty sure. Anyway, so let's just pause right there and focus on. Alright, so pause the memory and what's present. Snoop Dogg. My brother loved Snoop Dogg because he loved gang and crime activity. Sir Mix-a-Lot on the television in the living room, 10 years old, watching damn near pornographic imagery. It was pornographic imagery, just the nipples and the vagina were covered up, and that was it. And marijuana. And Cheech and Chong. Right? So, here's where you get up into a second here. Who produced Snoop Dogg, Poop Dog, Cheech and Chong, etc., right? And disseminated them to enter my house in 1992, and who produced those Sir Mix-a-Lot and other videos and broadcasted them. This is really important. Because if you look at the modern times, when the CIA, for example, wants to, incite a riot in Iran or something, they have to get smartphones behind enemy lines. They have to get satellite signals to broadcast their propaganda behind enemy lines. So the rap industry and Hollywood is propaganda. It's drug propaganda and porn propaganda. And criminal behavior, teaching, instruction for criminal behavior. And then who owned them? Leora Cohen, Lou Adler, etc. Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, all this. But this is an anti-Semitic. It's not just the Jews, it's not all Jews, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, so 1992, that led to me going homeless and on drugs most of my life. There's a lot between here and there, which I can get into if anybody sends any curiosity, but had all of this been different, just had my dad spend a longer time getting to know my mother instead of just rushing into a marriage, could have figured out she was schizophrenic and not gotten her pregnant because it's passed genetically, right? Can't expect that from my dad. Had my dad taken custody of me and gotten me out of the house where I was being abused and having drugs forced on me, etc., I could have ended up in university and career by the time I was 18. I could have been a doctor or a lawyer, etc. So, boom, social engineering. I spent most of my life homeless and on drugs, hitchhiking all over the country, train hopped in Mexico, things like that. Where I'm at 41 now in university with the high GPAs, where I should have been when I was 16, right? I had access to programs, Jump Start or something like that. Anyway, so eventually it all culminated in March 15th, 2008, where I electrocuted myself for whales and trees. And to me, self-inflicting 3 amputations and third-degree burns over 40% of my body is a pretty obvious sign of mental illness. But somehow the FBI, or, check the time, 17 minutes already. Yeah, I think I lowered the quality. The FBI or nobody else could figure out that there was mental illness, that I didn't have schizophrenia from the inbreeding of the Spanish conquistador colonies, etc. So I got placed on federal probation, which did force me to quit smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol. Somehow I ended up on Vashon Island. I have no idea how. Nobody on Vashon Island respected my sobriety. No, the government's evil, man. Do the weed, man. And so, because of the heavily saturated drug and alcohol abuse of white liberals on Vashon Island, it turns out secondhand marijuana activates and exacerbates schizophrenia. A whole lot of science behind that. What is colloquially referred to as the contact high. So, in 2009, I hit on a 12-year-old or 13-year-old girl. I think she was 12. According to the affidavit, I asked her for a blowjob at the Strawberry Festival in a whole crowd of people in an alleyway. I don't remember doing that. I was already on federal probation in 2008. Now, what happened between 2008 and 2009? I sought mental health from Greg Thompson at Vashon Youth and Family Services. State-provided mental health care and treatment. This was the biggest incident for me to make the statement after the many failures of state-provided mental health care. I started self-educating on psychology to self-apply my own. This is a big one. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew something was wrong with my head. Fucking clearly. Excuse my language. And if I didn't do something about it, bad things were going to happen as a result of untreated mental illness, like hitting on a kid at the Strawberry Festival. Instead of diagnosing and treating my condition, this seems very intentional. It seems like it was a deliberate thing. Vashon Island's community made it worse with drugs and alcohol. So arguably they were the architect behind this. But Greg Thompson, with I think over 20 or 30 years of experience, just could not figure out that I was schizophrenic, that I had a mental illness, despite the fact that I had self-inflicted 3 amputations with electricity for whales and trees, less than a year before walking into his office. It seems like bullshit to me. I think the Vashon Island white liberal community is run by drug dealers. And drug dealers have more power than the government, so they're the ones who told Greg what my diagnosis would be before I ever set foot in his office. Sounds paranoid, but that makes a lot more sense than just thinking that he simply did not know. And you know why that doesn't make any sense as well? When I electrocuted myself, I ended up in Harborview Hospital. I remember waking up to the nurse with a pen in my hand, signing a release, and I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "We got to cut your foot off." I said, "No, you don't." She said, "Yeah, we do." Starts arguing with me. I said, "F you, lady, you're not taking my foot." The doctors come in, they say, "Why do you think we don't have to amputate your foot?" I said, "Well, there's healthy peak ligaments and healthy adipose tissue. There's not burnt barbecue on a hamburger grill." And the doctor, with his whole team of med students, moment of silence, said, "Well, he's right. We can save his foot." Hence why I could have been a doctor. I need more than that doctor about my foot. And so I saved my own foot. And that Harborview discharge paperwork, they rubber stamp me as bipolar type 2. Now, Harborview Hospital is 19 miles away from Greg Thompson's office. I Google mapped it. This was in 2009, when there's such thing as phones and emails and fax machines. So Greg Thompson could have said, "Wait a minute, this guy electrocuted himself for whales and trees? Let me inquire into his medical history. Oh, look, he has diagnosis on a discharge paperwork like 7 months ago, or 5 months ago or something." Didn't think that? You didn't see the guy in your office with the self-inflicted amputations? You couldn't figure out this was an obvious symptom of mental illness? I don't buy that. So because Greg deliberately deprived me of mental health care, and thus Vashon Island deliberately made mental illness worse instead of better, right? This very deceptive and manipulative community that I now realize, that event occurred in 2009. I don't remember if I actually did it or not. The witness testimony was weird. Like, the witnesses said different statements came out of my mouth at the same time. Probably did it. I don't know. But anyway, this should have got me violated on federal probation. They didn't violate me on federal probation. The feds were smart enough to see through the bullshit of these Vashon Islanders. It didn't make any sense to me. Apparently it takes good white people, smart white people, to figure out the bullshit, to see through the bullshit of other white people. Not poor me, raised in poor Mexican, druggy, gang member stuff. I didn't have that sort of white-collar crime IQ. So the feds noticed a detail that I missed. They said, "Why did it take a year to file the charges?" Right? So the incident occurred in 2009, didn't file charges till 2010. This was a direct result of my mental illness not being treated, but exacerbated by secondhand marijuana, etc. The community of Vashon. So why did it take a year to file the charges? The Fed said, because of that, we don't think this is legit. We're not going to violate you. And eventually I left Vashon, but I still have that, on my record to haunt me, despite the fact that my mental illness was not only a valid legal defense. I tried to purchase a gun later on, and the same government and Vashon Island community that did not acknowledge my mental illness as a valid legal defense, all of a sudden acknowledged my mental illness to deny me the ownership of a firearm. So how does that work out? How is my mental illness simultaneously legally valid and invalid, just depending on whether it's a legal defense or a firearm ownership permit application denial? On top of that, there's a man named Jason Hayden. He's a black guy who killed a World War II veteran. And he live streamed it. He very famously, right, just started punching this guy in the head in Wisconsin during COVID quarantine because woke white liberals stuck the black schizophrenic boxer in with the white old man, and he killed the white old man. Didn't get punished at all. his schizophrenia was a valid legal defense. What was that other one in New York there? Jordan, Daniel Penny, or Jordan Neely, something? That black guy was schizophrenic. He has a history of violent felonies. I guarantee the marijuana in New York, the decriminalization, the medical, and then the legalization, right? Those are the three phases. All were directly responsible for Jordan Neely's homelessness, crimes, etc. The social engineers, the Merlin plutocracy run by the rich and powerful. It's not the Jews, by the way. I mean, maybe it is, but if it's the Jews, then why is YouTube forcing Muslim and Arab content on me because I support Israel? If the Jews run YouTube, then why is YouTube so anti-Israeli? Like, how does that make sense? Just so you don't think this is anti-Semitic. But anyway, whoever's running this, they know that marijuana is activating psychosis. They know that marijuana is causing... This is not an isolated incident. My story is very common. So many people smoke weed, fall off the grid, drop out of school, become homeless, schizophrenic, in prison, etc., etc., etc. So this is not, unique. But how is it that the white liberals in Michigan or Cincinnati, wherever Jason Hayden was, or New York City, etc., why did the schizophrenia defense for the blacks pass, but in 2010 mine didn't pass, right? So as I'm studying criminal justice reform, or criminal justice is the thing, but it's very woke and liberal, it's all about reform, they discussed Cesar Bagatti or something like that, and he discussed how the corruption of the administration of justice must be prevented. Clearly it has not been prevented. This was very weaponized. The rich white liberals of Vashon Island who push marijuana and all the other, lefty things, LGBT, etc., trans kids, they know exactly what they're doing, and they weaponize the justice system against people. And they're very good at this. They're very good at smiling to your face as they stab you in the back, as so many people I thought were my friends on Vashon Island did. Because to this day, they still don't acknowledge just the mere fact that I have schizophrenia, and marijuana activates and exacerbates schizophrenia. Now, I'm not one to be like them. If I'm wrong, then I want to know. So I self-applied the scientific method by eliminating involuntary exposure to secondhand marijuana. I moved to a state where it's currently still legal, and the police actually do something when I call them. I am currently in university with a 3.9 GPA. It was a 4.0, but some of the professors, etc. And fun fact, while all this is going on, somehow none of these people ever be held accountable. The people behind, the rap industry is like a CIA propaganda thing, or, Cheech and Chong in Hollywood is like drug propaganda, like the socially engineered moral decline, etc. Yeah. And there's a whole lot more, but for the sake of time, it's insane to me that... Oh yeah. Let's do another timeline one. So I moved back to Albuquerque repeatedly to try to reconnect with my family. They proved me right every time. Just in case I was wrong, it was me and not them. My brother still does weed, etc., etc., etc. But I moved in with these Christians in the South Valley, next to this Episcopalian church at 2811 Don Felipe Road. And they were very woke, very lefty, very Black Lives Matter, very pro-marijuana. And they, we ended up having disagreements. They called me a Nazi because I was pointing out that technically the church shouldn't support homosexuality or women preachers, etc. And they, I sent them emails saying, can you please stop allowing people to smoke marijuana on your property because the secondhand marijuana is setting off my schizophrenia. Previously, I put a landlord in the hospital with a baseball bat with 7 stitches in a schizophrenic episode set off by the secondhand marijuana from people next door. This is how I know I'm not in the wrong here. I've communicated this to law enforcement, government, politicians, church, etc. They seem to just cannot comprehend this factual truth. They refuse to comprehend it. So that woman, her husband was a judge. She got a restraining order on me and claimed that I was threatening them to bash their heads in with a baseball bat, even though that wasn't actually in there. So, for all I know, I have a warrant maybe out of Albuquerque for violating this, like, restraining order, even though it wasn't intentionally. But they're pushing marijuana on me that causes schizophrenia. They're not held accountable legally for that. That's just one of the many examples of the corruption of the justice system, along with this, etc. Derek Chauvin wouldn't be in jail if the justice system wasn't corrupt. Neither would those men in Georgia. Darrell Brooks never would have murdered those white people at the Christmas parade in Wisconsin because he wouldn't have gotten released by the Bail Project. And so forth and so on. Ryan Carson wouldn't have been murdered. Marie, I forget the woman's name. I have it on my phone here, one sec. Marie Pava Marie Lepere, etc., etc., etc. So, my theory is that Judaism will give me the tools to thrive and overcome in this vile age of socially engineered corruption, rather than passively and sufferingly endure it. But in a fair system, these people to these people to these people would all be held accountable for the horrible things they are doing to people like me. The righteous suffer while the wicked prosper, right? We're in an age where being good and doing the right thing gets you punished, telling the truth gets you punished, and being bad gets you rewarded. It's wild.